The ocean had always been Evelyn Carter's escape. Its rhythmic pull and release reminded her that life went on, no matter what happened on shore. But tonight, as she sat alone in her small, dimly lit living room, the sound of the waves crashing outside her Florida condo felt more like a taunt than a comfort. 58 years old, newly divorced after 3 decades of marriage, Evelyn was still learning how to be alone. The silence was sharp. Her children lived in other states, busy with their own families. The phone calls were warm but brief, the kind of conversations that ended with, "I'll call you soon, Mom," and soon rarely came. She wrapped her hands around a lukewarm cup of chamomile tea and stared at the framed photos on the wall. There she was, 25 years younger, smiling on a family vacation, her husband's arm draped casually around her shoulders. She couldn't look at it for long. Those smiles felt like they belonged to another woman, someone who believed in forever. The divorce had been civil on paper, but brutal in spirit. Years of small betrayals had eroded what little was left, until they were just 2 people sharing a mortgage. Signing the papers hadn't been liberating, it had been disorienting. And now, here she was, staring down the rest of her life with no idea what to do next. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mary, her best friend since high school. "Mary, Evie, you've got to get out of that house. You're starting to sound like a hermit." Evelyn smirked. Mary had been trying for weeks to coax her out. Drinks, trivia night, art classes. Evelyn had turned them all down. But tonight, she didn't have the energy to resist. She typed back, "Evelyn, what did you have in mind?" 10 minutes later, Mary was at her door, tapping impatiently, a mischievous grin on her face. "Put on something that doesn't scream retirement home," she teased, eyeing Evelyn's faded sweater and worn slippers. Evelyn rolled her eyes, but couldn't help laughing. "And where exactly are we going?" "Down to the sandbar," Mary said, referring to the seaside bar just a few blocks away. "Live music, decent drinks, and—" she paused for dramatic effect, "men." "I'm not looking for anyone," Evelyn protested automatically. "Who said anything about looking? Just let someone buy you a drink. Let someone look at you like you're still the main event, not a postscript." That hit a nerve. Evelyn thought of the way her ex-husband had stopped looking at her years ago, the way she had started to feel invisible in her own home. A flicker of something, pride, defiance, stirred inside her. Maybe Mary was right. Maybe she did need one night where she wasn't just the divorcee, or the grandmother. 4 years she had measured her worth through the quiet metrics of a long marriage. Clean laundry, warm meals, bills paid on time, birthdays remembered. Somewhere along the way, the woman she'd once been, the one who laughed too loud, who danced barefoot in the kitchen, who took spontaneous road trips just to watch the sunrise, had slipped beneath layers of responsibility and routine. Since the divorce, she'd felt as if the world had started looking past her, as though women her age were expected to fade into the background, to settle for comfort instead of excitement. She hated that idea. Evelyn's mind drifted to a night from decades ago, when she'd worn this same shade of lipstick to a jazz club in New Orleans. A stranger had asked her to dance, and for 3 minutes she'd felt like the most radiant woman in the room. That memory clung to her now, warm and bittersweet. Maybe, she thought, there was still a version of herself worth bringing back. She opened her closet, running her fingers over dresses she hadn't worn in years. Her hand paused on a deep red cocktail dress, low neckline, cap sleeves, a cut that flattered her curves. She had bought it for her 40th birthday and only worn it once. Slipping it on now felt like a small rebellion. She added a touch of lipstick, let her silver-streaked hair fall loosely over her shoulders, and when she stepped out, Mary's approving whistle was immediate. "Now that's the Evie I remember," Mary said, linking arms with her. The sandbar was buzzing by the time they arrived. A local band was playing a bluesy cover of an old Fleetwood Mac song, the kind that made people sway without realizing it. The scent of salt water mixed with cheap cologne, laughter rose in bursts, and amber light spilled across weathered wooden floors. Evelyn felt the warmth of the room wrap around her. For the first time in months, she wasn't thinking about the empty condo waiting for her. She was present. Every note of the music, every clink of glasses, every hum of conversation pulled her further from the life she had been living. Mary disappeared into the crowd, already chatting with a group of retirees at the far end of the bar. Evelyn found a seat near the corner, ordered a glass of Merlot, and let herself watch the ebb and flow of strangers. She wasn't here to meet anyone, but she couldn't deny the thrill of being somewhere she could be seen. She was halfway through her drink when she noticed him. He was leaning casually against the bar, tall and broad-shouldered, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. He had the kind of face you noticed in a crowd, not traditionally handsome, but magnetic in the way he carried himself. When his eyes met hers, he didn't look away. Instead, a slow smile formed, deliberate and unhurried, as if he'd already decided to cross the room before his feet even moved. By the time he stood in front of her, Evelyn could smell his cologne, subtle, expensive, the kind that lingered in memory. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, voice warm with the faintest rasp. Evelyn hesitated, but only for a second. "Sure." As he pulled out the chair, she caught herself wondering what she might be starting. But then she told herself it was just a conversation, just one night. And as the music played on, she had no idea that she'd just let Darren Mitchell into her life, and that by morning she would be gone. Darren Mitchell had a way of settling into a chair like he belonged there. His posture was relaxed, one arm resting casually on the table, the other nursing a glass of amber whiskey. He looked at Evelyn as if there was nothing else in the room worth noticing. "I'm Darren," he said, extending his hand. "Evelyn," she replied, slipping hers into his. His grip was firm but not aggressive, the kind that made you feel he meant it. "Evelyn," he repeated slowly, as if tasting the syllables. "Beautiful name. Old-fashioned. Strong." She couldn't help but smile. "Thank you. Not many people say that anymore." "That's because not many people appreciate the good things in life," he said, his eyes locking on hers. "But I do." They started with the usual small talk, where they were from, what brought them here tonight, but Darren had a gift for making it feel intimate. He didn't pepper her with rapid-fire questions. Instead, he let silences linger just long enough for her to fill them, and when she did, he listened. Really listened. He told her he'd recently moved to town for business opportunities, that he'd been in construction, real estate, a little bit of everything. When she asked if he had family nearby, his expression shifted for just a moment. Something shadowed crossed his face before he said, "No, it's just me now." Then, as if changing the subject, he leaned forward and said, "But I think I was supposed to meet you tonight." Evelyn laughed softly, shaking her head. "You can't possibly know that." "Sure I can. Some things you just feel." She wanted to believe him. After all, how often did a man look at her like she was the only woman in the room? But even as she let the warmth of his words settle over her, a small part of her noticed the way his eyes flicked toward the entrance every few minutes, as though tracking someone, or making sure no one unexpected walked in. Once, when the bartender passed by and gave Darren a brief nod, his smile thinned for a heartbeat before returning full force, like a mask slipping back into place. When he spoke about his business opportunities, there was an odd precision to his choice of words, carefully vague, never giving more than necessary. It wasn't enough to raise alarm, but it lingered in her thoughts like a whisper she couldn't quite catch. Evelyn pushed it aside. This was supposed to be a light evening, not an interrogation. Still, the flicker of unease stayed with her, buried under the rush of being seen and heard. A server came by, asking if they wanted another round. Evelyn hesitated. She rarely had more than one drink, but Darren said, "Let me get this one," and she found herself nodding. When the second glass arrived, Darren lifted his in a toast. To second chances. She clinked her glass against his. To second chances. They talked for another hour, drifting from the safe topics into the personal. Evelyn found herself telling him things she hadn't even told Mary. How her divorce had left her feeling invisible. How she feared she'd wasted the best years of her life on someone who didn't value her. Darren didn't interrupt or try to fix anything. He just listened, his gaze steady, his expression soft, like every word mattered. At one point, he reached across the table and lightly brushed her hand. "You know," he said, "you have this light in you. I don't think you even see it." Her cheeks warmed. "I think you might be overestimating me." "No," he said simply. "If anything, I'm underestimating you." It was almost too much. Too perfect. But instead of pulling back, Evelyn felt herself leaning in. Eventually, Darren glanced at his watch. "It's late," he said, "but I'm not ready for this to end. There's a hotel down the street, right on the beach. We could walk, talk, maybe sit on the balcony and listen to the waves." Evelyn froze. The idea felt reckless. She barely knew him. And yet, she didn't want the night to end either. The way he'd listened, the way he made her feel, seen, wanted, it had been a long time since she'd felt that alive. She searched his face for any sign of pressure, but all she saw was calm invitation. "We don't have to," he added quickly. "I just thought, maybe it'd be nice to keep talking somewhere quieter." Something inside her tilted toward yes. "All right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The walk to the hotel was slow and easy, the salty night air brushing against her skin. Darren stayed close, his hand occasionally touching hers, not holding but there, ready. They passed closed shops, the glow of street lamps casting pools of light on the sidewalk. He told her about places he'd traveled, New Orleans in the spring, a fishing trip in Alaska, and she told him about the summer she'd spent in Italy decades ago, when she'd thought anything was possible. At the hotel, Darren held the door for her. The lobby was warm, the scent of polished wood and faint vanilla in the air. He spoke briefly to the clerk, sliding his credit card across the counter without hesitation. No questions, no awkwardness. The elevator ride was quiet, except for the hum of the machinery. Evelyn felt the soft thud of her own heartbeat in her chest. She told herself again it was just conversation. A nightcap. Inside the room, Darren turned on a single lamp, bathing the space in golden light. The balcony door was cracked open, letting in the sound of the surf. He poured 2 glasses of wine from the minibar and handed one to her. "To new beginnings," he said. She took a sip, the wine smooth on her tongue. They sat on the small sofa, talking about books they'd loved, songs that stayed with them. Darren had a way of threading humor into the conversation, making her laugh unexpectedly. But every so often, Evelyn caught a flicker in his expression, quick, gone before she could name it, like a shadow moving behind his eyes. She ignored it. Maybe she wanted to. The night deepened. Their conversation slowed, drifting into stretches of quiet that felt more comfortable than they should have. Darren's hand brushed against hers again, lingering this time. "You know," he said softly, "you make it very easy to forget there's a world outside this room." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Maybe that's the point." He leaned in, his gaze holding hers, and for a long moment the rest of the world truly did fall away. Somewhere outside, the waves kept rolling in, pulling back, rolling in again, steady, inevitable. And while Evelyn thought she was stepping into a night she'd remember with a smile, Darren was already thinking about the morning. The wine warmed Evelyn from the inside, loosening the knots of caution that had been with her for years. She leaned back into the sofa, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass, listening to the waves through the open balcony door. Darren sat close enough that she could feel his presence, not crowding her, but close enough that the air between them seemed charged. "You know," she said softly, "it's been a long time since I've let my guard down like this." Darren tilted his head, studying her. "I get that. But sometimes you have to take the risk. Life's too short to play it safe every day." She smiled, but part of her still resisted. "Easy for you to say." His eyes held hers for a moment longer than was comfortable. "I've lost enough to know what I'm talking about." He sipped his drink, letting that hang in the air without explaining. They talked more, about music, childhood memories, places they wished they'd seen. Darren told her about an uncle who taught him how to fish, a woman he almost married once, a business deal that went south. The stories felt polished, as if he'd told them before, but Evelyn didn't notice. She was too wrapped up in the way he made her feel important. Every so often, Darren's phone would buzz in his pocket. Each time, he glanced at it quickly and slid it back without comment. Evelyn noticed, but told herself it wasn't her place to ask. At one point, Darren stood and walked to the balcony, pushing the door open wider. The night air rushed in, carrying the scent of the ocean. He looked out at the dark horizon, his voice almost lost in the sound of the surf. "You ever think about just disappearing? Starting over somewhere nobody knows you?" Evelyn laughed lightly. "You mean like witness protection?" "Maybe," he said, turning back to her with a faint smile. "Or maybe just freedom. No past. No baggage." She shook her head. "I wouldn't know where to begin." "That's the thing," he replied, stepping closer. "You don't need to know. You just do it." There was something in the way he said it, a glint in his eyes, a tone that suggested he'd thought about it more than once. Evelyn filed it away in the back of her mind, but by then the wine and his charm had blurred the edges of her caution. As midnight crept in, Darren moved from the balcony back to the sofa. "You tired?" he asked. "Not really," she said, though her body felt heavy with the hour. He reached for her glass and set it on the table. "Why don't you lie down for a bit? I'll keep watch over the ocean." She hesitated, but the bed did look inviting. She kicked off her shoes and lay back, feeling the soft give of the mattress. Darren stayed seated at the edge, looking down at her with that same warm gaze that had disarmed her from the start. "You're safe here," he murmured. Evelyn closed her eyes, letting the sound of the waves and the low hum of the air conditioner lull her toward sleep. She didn't see Darren glance toward the table where her purse sat. She didn't notice when he slipped his phone out again, turning his back to her as he sent a quick text. "It's done. Morning." He put the phone away and turned back to her, his expression smoothing into something gentle again. For the next half hour, he sat there, occasionally brushing a strand of hair from her face. If anyone had walked in, they might have thought it was a tender moment between two people who had known each other for years. But in Darren's mind, it was different. Evelyn wasn't a lover, or even a friend. She was an opportunity. He'd heard about her before he'd ever set foot in the sandbar that night. The bartender had mentioned she'd come into a decent sum after her divorce, cash Darren desperately needed. His gambling debts were piling up, and his usual tricks were running out of rope. Still, there was something about her that made him hesitate, not enough to stop, but enough to wonder what might have been if he'd met her in another life. That hesitation annoyed him. He shook it off. Evelyn stirred slightly, her breathing deepening again as she drifted back under. Darren stood and moved quietly to her purse. His hands were quick and practiced. He found her wallet, her bank card, a slip of paper with a pin written in her handwriting. Perfect. He slipped everything back in place, making sure nothing looked disturbed, and returned to the balcony. Outside, the ocean stretched endlessly, dark and indifferent. He lit a cigarette, inhaling deeply, the ember flaring in the breeze. When he came back inside, Evelyn was still asleep, one arm draped across her stomach, the sheet tangled around her legs. He watched her for a moment, then reached for the half-finished glass of wine on the table. From his pocket he pulled a small vial, clear liquid catching the lamplight. He hesitated again, his jaw tightening. "This is just life," he whispered, almost as if convincing himself. "You take what you can, before someone takes it from you." The liquid disappeared into the wine with no sound, no color change. He set the glass gently back on the table, just within reach for when she woke thirsty. Then he sat back down, waiting. The first light of morning crept in through the thin curtains, painting the room in pale gold. Darren was already dressed. His shirt was neatly buttoned, his shoes polished as if nothing had happened during the night. Evelyn hadn't stirred. She lay on her back, her breathing shallow, her lips faintly parted. To anyone glancing quickly, she might have looked like she was simply in a deep sleep. But Darren knew better. He stood at the foot of the bed, watching her for a long moment. There was no satisfaction in his eyes, no guilt either, just a flat calm, the look of a man who had decided long ago that his survival mattered more than anyone else's. He checked his watch. Time to go. Darren walked to the table, picked up his glass, and took a slow drink of the whiskey he'd left untouched the night before. He set it down with care, glancing once more at Evelyn. "You made it easy," he murmured, almost like a farewell. With practiced movements, he collected his things, wallet, phone, jacket, and slipped her bank card into his pocket. He didn't hurry. He never did. Rushing drew attention. The hallway outside was quiet, carpet muffling his footsteps. In the lobby, the night clerk had been replaced by a young woman scrolling through her phone. She barely looked up when Darren gave her a polite nod and walked out into the early morning air. The streets were nearly empty. A few joggers moved along the boardwalk, the sound of their sneakers hitting the wood echoing in the stillness. Darren didn't look back at the hotel. He kept walking until he reached his car, a rental parked a block away, and drove off without a trace of hesitation. Upstairs, the hotel room remained silent. The ocean waves whispered against the shore, the only sound to keep Evelyn company. It was nearly 2 hours later when the knock came. "Housekeeping." The voice was cheerful, muffled through the door. When there was no answer, the maid knocked again, louder this time. "Housekeeping." Still no response. She pulled a master key from her apron and opened the door. The scent hit her first, faint, almost metallic under the salt of the ocean air. She stepped inside cautiously. "Ma'am." Evelyn didn't move. The maid approached the bed, her footsteps faltering when she noticed the unnatural stillness of the woman's chest. "Oh, my God!" The wine-glass was still on the table, a faint smudge of lipstick on the rim. The maid backed away quickly, fumbling for her phone. Within minutes, the hallway was swarming. Hotel security, the manager, guests craning their necks to see. Someone called 911. Detective Alan McKee was the first to arrive with his partner, Detective Rachel Flores. McKee, a man in his late 40s with sharp eyes and a voice like gravel, stepped into the room and immediately scanned the scene. Evelyn lay as if she had simply fallen asleep, but her lips were tinged with blue. Flores moved to the table, noting the half-empty glass of wine. "Still fresh," she murmured. McKee's gaze lingered on the balcony door, opened just enough to let the ocean air drift in. "Looks peaceful," he said, "but I've seen enough of these to know better." The paramedics confirmed it within minutes. Evelyn was gone. No signs of struggle. No immediate evidence of injury. That meant poison, overdose, or something else that left no marks. The lead paramedic glanced at McKee with a tight expression. Her skin's cool, lividity's set. "She's been gone for a few hours at least." McKee crouched near the bed, eyes scanning the scene. He noticed the faint, almost imperceptible redness at the edges of her fingernails, a detail most would overlook. "Bag her hands," he instructed quietly. "Let's make sure we don't lose any trace evidence." From his pocket, he pulled on gloves and examined the wine glass. The faint lipstick mark was exactly where her mouth would have touched, but there was something else, an almost oily sheen clinging to the inside of the rim. Flores took out her phone, photographing every angle before carefully sealing the glass in an evidence bag. "We'll run a tox screen. Could be a fast-acting sedative." The medical examiner's assistant began a quick field assessment, noting the absence of needle marks, bruising, or signs of a fall. "If it was poison, it was clean. No taste, no smell," she said, glancing at McKee. "Whoever did this knew what they were doing." McKee's jaw tightened. He'd seen this before. Killers who left nothing obvious, who made it look like sleep had simply gone too far. Flores turned to the hotel manager. "Who checked in with her?" The manager hesitated. "A man. Mid-40s, maybe. Tall, dark hair. Paid in cash." "Name?" McKee asked. "Darren. Mitchell, I think." McKee exchanged a glance with Flores. The name meant nothing yet, but the method, quiet, clean, already raised alarms. While the body was prepared for transport to the medical examiner, McKee walked to the balcony. He looked out at the wide stretch of ocean, the endless horizon. "Someone wanted this to look like a night gone wrong," he said quietly. "But it feels planned." Flores nodded. "Let's pull the security footage." He had to come in and out of here sometime. Back at the front desk, the clerk queued up the previous night's recordings. There he was, Darren Mitchell, walking in with Evelyn just before midnight, smiling, holding the door for her. Hours later, just after sunrise, he left alone. No hurry, no glance back. McKee's jaw tightened. Run his name. Credit cards. Anything. As the footage looped again, Flores noticed something. "He's carrying a small bag when he leaves. Didn't have it when they arrived." "Could be hers," McKee said. "Could be cash, jewelry, or nothing at all. But I'm betting it's not nothing." He stepped away from the monitor, his voice firm. "This isn't a random fling gone bad. This is a hunter who knew exactly what he was after. And somewhere out there, Darren Mitchell was already on to his next mark." Detective Alan McKee didn't waste time. By noon, he and Detective Rachel Flores were seated in a cramped conference room at the station, the hotel security footage looping on the wall monitor. Darren Mitchell's face, calm, confident, stared back at them each time he walked through the lobby. Flores tapped a pen against a notepad. "It's almost like he knew exactly where the cameras were. Look at the way he angles his head, keeps his face partially in shadow." McKee grunted. "That's not luck. That's experience." The hotel had copied Darren's registration form for them. It was neat, legible, and useless. No matching driver's license number, no real address, a prepaid cell number that went straight to voicemail. Whoever Darren Mitchell was, he'd built this identity for the short term. While Flores ran his alias through national databases, McKee took a different approach. He called Evelyn's daughter Rebecca, who lived in Atlanta. Rebecca's voice broke when she heard his introduction. I just spoke to her last week. She sounded happy. She said she was finally going to start living again. Did she mention meeting anyone? A new friend, maybe? McKee asked gently. No. My mom's private about those things. But she'd never. Rebecca paused, then added. She was careful. She didn't just bring strangers into her life. McKee hesitated before telling her. The man she was last seen with used the name Darren Mitchell. Does that mean anything to you? No, Rebecca said. But if you find him, don't let him walk away. When McKee hung up, Flores stepped into the room holding a thin file. We've got something. Georgia, 2019. Woman in her 50s found dead in a hotel room. Listed as an accidental overdose. Guess who was the last person seen with her on camera? McKee raised his eyebrows. Let me guess, he wasn't calling himself Darren Mitchell. Nope. He was Daniel Mason, then. Same build, same posture, same habit of walking out right at sunrise. Flores spread out the photos from the Georgia case next to Evelyn's. 2 women, different cities, but eerily similar circumstances. Middle-aged, recently divorced or widowed, dead within hours of meeting him. This is a pattern, McKee said. Charm, gain their trust fast, then. Take what he wants and vanish, Flores finished. The next lead came from Evelyn's bank records. Less than an hour after Darren left the hotel, her account showed a $15,000 withdrawal from an ATM across the state line in Georgia. The camera outside the ATM caught a blurred profile, but the build was unmistakable. That's interstate, McKee said grimly. We can bring the feds in. By late afternoon, they had a preliminary bolo, be on the lookout, circulating through law enforcement networks. The notice listed multiple aliases, the most recent photo pulled from the hotel security feed, and a warning, approach with caution, suspect may be involved in multiple suspicious deaths. McKee stood at the whiteboard in their squad room, drawing lines between cases, Georgia 2019, Texas 2021, and now Florida. Each victim fit the same profile, financially secure, emotionally vulnerable, and alone. Each encounter was short, intense, and fatal. What's his endgame? Flores asked. Is it just about the money? McKee stared at the board for a moment. Money's part of it. But you don't take this many risks unless you enjoy the game. He's a hunter. The thrill is picking them out, getting them to trust him, and leaving without a trace. That night, the detectives reviewed more hotel footage frame by frame. In one clip, Darren briefly stepped out to the balcony. In his reflection against the glass, his phone screen was visible, an open message thread. The letters were too small to read, but McKee froze the frame. Enhance it, he told the tech team. It took hours, but by morning they had enough to make out a partial message from the night before Evelyn's death. She's the one. Meet in the morning. McKee replayed the balcony footage, slowing it frame by frame. Just before Darren slipped his phone back into his pocket, a faint reflection appeared in the glass. A second figure, blurred and partially obscured by the curtain, standing several feet behind him on the balcony. Could be a guest from the next room, Flores suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. Or someone who doesn't want to be seen, McKee countered. A deeper review of the hotel's exterior cameras revealed a curious detail. 20 minutes before Darren and Evelyn entered the lobby, another person, tall, who'd pulled low, had walked in and headed straight for the back exit toward the beach. The timestamp matched the moment Darren first arrived at the bar that night. McKee tapped the screen. If he's working with someone, that's our ghost. They're in the background, moving just out of sight, but they're there. It wasn't proof, not yet. But it was enough to tell McKee one thing. Darren wasn't hunting alone. Flores shook her head. So he's not working alone. McKee's expression hardened. Which means she was more than just a mark. She was a target. By now, Darren could have been anywhere. He had no fixed home, no close friends anyone could name, and a dozen ways to disappear into a crowd. But McKee had hunted men like this before, and he knew one thing. They all had patterns. Find the bars, he told Flores. The ones near coastal towns, with live music and good lighting. He's going to be looking for his next Evelyn, and if we're lucky, we'll be looking for him first. The coastal bars were different during the day, quiet, almost sleepy, but McKee preferred to see them like this. In the early morning light, there were no crowds, no music, just the bones of the place's predators like Darren hunted in. He and Flores split up the list they'd compiled, working their way down the coast. The bartenders knew the drill. Some barely remembered him. Tall guy. Dark hair. Yeah, might have been here a couple weeks ago. Had a smile women seemed to like. Others remembered more. What he drank, how he leaned in when he spoke, how he paid in cash and never stayed long after he made a connection. By the third bar, Flores had picked up a lead. A woman named Sheila. Said she met him here last Friday. Said his name was David. She slid her phone across the table to McKee. The photo Sheila had snapped was grainy, but the man's posture, the tilt of his head. It was Darren, no question. McKee's pulse quickened. Did she give you a number? She did. It's already dead. Burner phone. But she said he mentioned heading north. Savannah, maybe. They contacted the Savannah Police Department, passing along the information and Darren's most recent photo. Within hours, an officer there called back. We might have something. A woman fitting your victim profile was reported missing this morning. Last seen leaving a jazz lounge with a man who looks a lot like your guy. McKee and Flores were on the road within the hour, the drive to Savannah tense and silent. Every mile they covered, the chances of finding the woman alive narrowed. Darren's pattern was precise. Meet, charm, isolate, and within 12 hours, the woman was dead. They arrived to find the missing woman's sister waiting at the station, wringing her hands. Her name was Laura, and she'd been the one to file the report. Her name's Denise, she told them. She's 54. She's been lonely since her husband passed. Last night she called me, excited about this man she'd met. Said they were going to get breakfast in the morning. McKee's jaw tightened. Did she say where she was staying? A boutique hotel off River Street. I called her room this morning. No answer. I went over there, but the clerk said she'd checked in with a man and didn't come down today. I knew something was wrong. They moved quickly. The hotel clerk confirmed the couple had returned late, but only the man had been seen leaving, around sunrise, carrying a small leather bag. McKee and Flores exchanged a look. The pattern hadn't changed. They went up to the room, their footsteps echoing in the narrow hallway. The clerk opened the door for them. The moment McKee stepped inside, the smell hit him, not as strong as with Evelyn, but enough to make his stomach turn. Denise lay on the bed, her eyes closed, her lips pale. Flores moved in first, checking for a pulse, though they both knew what they'd find. She's gone, she said softly. On the table beside the bed sat 2 wine glasses. One was empty, the other half full. McKee scanned the scene, noting the details. Purse on the chair, phone charging on the nightstand, a crumpled receipt from a jewelry store in the trash. He slipped on gloves and picked it up. The purchase was for a gold bracelet, paid for in cash. The date matched yesterday's. Flores was at the desk, checking drawers. He left her bank cards, but the cash is gone. McKee turned the bracelet receipt over. On the back, in neat handwriting, was a phone number. Flores, he said, run this. It traced back to another prepaid phone, purchased in Jacksonville 2 weeks ago. They'd expected that. But there was more. Cell tower data showed the phone had pinged near a small marina just outside Savannah less than an hour ago. McKee's voice was low but urgent. He's not running far. He's getting out by water. They coordinated with the harbor patrol, moving fast. The docks were quiet except for the creak of boats against the pilings and the slap of water against the hulls. Then Flores spotted him. Dark jacket, ball cap pulled low, carrying the same leather bag described by the hotel clerk. Darren! McKee's shout cut through the air. The man froze for only a fraction of a second before bolting down the dock. McKee gave chase, the wooden planks thudding under his boots. Darren was fast, weaving between moored boats, his bag swinging with each stride. He glanced back once, eyes narrowed, then veered toward a small motorboat idling at the end of the dock. 2 harbor officers intercepted him before he could jump aboard. He fought, wild, desperate, but McKee was there in seconds, yanking him back by the collar and slamming him against the dock rail. "You've been running a long time," McKee said, his voice steady. "But it ends here." Darren's breath came in sharp bursts. "You've got nothing. These women trusted you," McKee snapped, shoving the cuffs on. "And you poisoned them." Back at the station, Darren kept his expression neutral during questioning, denying everything. But the evidence was piling up. Security footage from multiple hotels, ATM withdrawals from victims' accounts, toxicology reports linking each death to the same rare sedative. When confronted with the partial message recovered from his phone, "She's the one. Meet in the morning," he leaned back in his chair and smirked. That could mean anything. Flores didn't take her eyes off him. "It means you weren't working alone. Who's your partner?" Silence. It was the same answer they got for the next hour. By the end of the day, Darren was booked on 2 counts of murder and multiple charges of fraud and theft, with more likely to come as other jurisdictions reviewed their cold cases. The DA wanted to push for a full investigation into the suspected earlier deaths in Georgia and Texas. That night, McKee stood alone in the evidence room, looking at the photos, Evelyn, Denise, and the others whose names were still being confirmed. Each smile was different, but the eyes were the same, open, trusting, unaware they'd been marked from the moment Darren spotted them. Flores stepped in quietly. "You think he'll ever give up the name of the person helping him?" McKee didn't answer right away. "Maybe. Or maybe that's the last card he's holding." He slid the photos back into their folder. "Either way, he's not hurting anyone else." Outside, the marina was quiet again, the boats bobbing in the dark water. Somewhere beyond the docks, the tide was turning, carrying away the last traces of a man who thought he could vanish forever. McKee knew better. Predators always leave a trail, sometimes in blood, sometimes in silence, but always enough for someone willing to follow. And this time, the hunt was over. The news broke the next morning. "Suspected serial predator arrested in Savannah Marina," the headline read. Darren's booking photo spread across every major news outlet. To most, he looked like any middle-aged man. Calm eyes, faint smirk. But to the families of the women whose lives he had ended, that face was a doorway to grief they would never escape. In Atlanta, Rebecca Carter sat in her kitchen, the morning sun falling across a table covered in unopened condolence cards. She'd been awake since 3, her mind looping the same images, her mother laughing, her mother alone in that hotel room. She had answered so many reporters' questions in the past 24 hours that she'd started hearing her own voice like it belonged to someone else. When she saw Darren's photo, her chest tightened. She tried to picture him sitting across from her mother that night, smiling, listening, pretending to care. The thought made her grip the edge of the table until her knuckles whitened. Her phone rang. It was Detective McKee. "They've officially tied him to at least 3 other suspicious deaths," he said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of the truth. "We believe there are more. We're still building the case." Rebecca's voice trembled. "Will he stay in prison?" "He's not walking out," McKee said firmly. "The DA's office is going for the maximum." When she hung up, Rebecca stared at the photo again, but this time she noticed something new. Not just Darren's smirk, but the faint shadow of someone standing just outside the booking camera's frame. She wondered if that was his partner, the one the detectives believed existed, the one who might still be free. In Evelyn's hometown, the small church she'd attended for decades was overflowing the day of her memorial. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers packed the pews, drawn by the story that had gripped the community. Mary sat in the front row, clutching a framed photo of Evelyn taken years ago on a windy beach day, her hair wild and her smile unguarded. When the pastor spoke, his voice broke. Evelyn lived with grace, even when life tested her. She believed in second chances, and she should have had hers. The words cut through the air, quieting the faint rustle of tissues and muffled sobs. Mary kept her eyes on the photo, remembering the last night she'd seen Evelyn, the red dress, the nervous laugh, the promise of just one drink. She felt an ache of guilt settle in her chest. She had told Evelyn to go, told her to let someone look at you like you're still the main event. After the service, people lingered in the parking lot, some sharing stories about Evelyn, others whispering about the arrest. A few voiced anger at the justice system, wondering aloud how a man like Darren could move across states, kill repeatedly, and avoid detection for years. In the weeks that followed, the DA's office released more details. The rare sedative found in Evelyn's system matched traces in the other confirmed victims. Investigators believed Darren's accomplice was responsible for acquiring the drug, laundering the stolen money, and possibly scouting new victims. But the identity of that person remained unknown. For McKee, it was a loose end he couldn't let go of. Late nights at his desk, he traced connections, small marinas, cash-only bars, unregistered cell numbers. He told Flores he felt like he was staring at a puzzle with one missing piece, the piece that explained how Darren kept finding women who fit the exact profile. The community clung to the fact that Darren was locked away, awaiting trial. But there was no real closure. Every time another potential victim's name surfaced, another family was thrust into the same cycle of grief and rage. Rebecca visited her mother's favorite beach a month after the memorial. She walked barefoot along the shore, the wind cold against her skin. In her hand, she held a small envelope of her mother's ashes, the rest kept in an urn at home. She stepped into the shallows, letting the waves pull gently at her ankles. "You just wanted one night to feel alive," she whispered. "I'm sorry it ended like this." She opened the envelope, letting the ashes scatter into the wind, watching as the tide carried them out toward the horizon. Behind her, the world went on, families setting up umbrellas, children running in the surf, but Rebecca stood there until the envelope was empty, her hands shaking. In Savannah, McKee stood on the marina dock where Darren had been arrested. The water was calm, the sun low in the sky. He knew the trial would be ugly. Darren would play the part of the misunderstood drifter, his defense poking at any gap in the evidence. But McKee also knew the victims' stories were stronger than Darren's lies. He took a long breath, looking out over the water. Predators like Darren always thought they could outsmart the system, always believed they were the ones in control. But sooner or later, they slipped. And when they did, someone had to be there to catch them. In the court filings, Evelyn's name appeared alongside the others, a stark reminder that she was now part of a pattern instead of her own story. But to those who loved her, she would never be just another victim. And somewhere, perhaps in another coastal town, another set of eyes might already be scanning a crowd, looking for the next Evelyn. Months later, the trial began. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back wall. Families of victims filled the benches, and Darren sat at the defense table in a crisp suit that did nothing to soften the chill in his eyes. He didn't look at Rebecca or any of the other families. His gaze stayed fixed on the judge, as if the rest of the room didn't exist. The prosecution's case was methodical. They showed the security footage from each hotel, the ATM withdrawals, the toxicology reports linking all the deaths to the same rare sedative. They called expert witnesses who explained how the drug could be slipped into a drink without altering the taste or smell. Rebecca took the stand. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled as she told the jury about her mother, how Evelyn had survived a brutal divorce, how she was finally ready to live again. She didn't look at Darren until the very end, when she said, "You saw her as an opportunity. I saw her as my mother. And now she's gone because of you." If Darren felt anything, it didn't show. The defense tried to paint a different picture. A drifter who got caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, a man being blamed for tragedies that were coincidences. But the jury wasn't swayed. After 3 days of deliberation, they returned with their verdict, guilty on all counts. When the judge read the sentence, life without parole, Rebecca felt a rush of relief, but it was laced with something colder. The truth was, no matter how long Darren stayed behind bars, it wouldn't bring Evelyn back. It wouldn't give any of them the time they had lost. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the steps. Rebecca spoke briefly, her voice calm but firm. "Justice means he can't hurt anyone else. But it doesn't end the hurt he's already caused." She didn't answer any more questions. Back in his office, McKee watched the news coverage on a muted screen. Flores leaned in the doorway. "We got him," she said. McKee nodded, but his eyes stayed on the screen. "Yeah, but someone else out there knows how he operated. We still don't have the partner." That loose end gnawed at him. The text message, "She's the one. Meet in the morning," was proof Darren hadn't been working alone. Somewhere out there, another person had been part of every plan, every setup, and they were still free. Rebecca knew it too. Weeks after the trial, she got a letter in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 6 words typed neatly across it. He wasn't the only one watching. Tucked behind the sheet of paper was a small Polaroid photograph. Rebecca's breath caught when she slid it free. It was a candid shot of her standing alone on the beach where she'd scattered her mother's ashes, her hair wind-blown, head tilted toward the water. The photo had been taken from a distance, but the focus was sharp, almost deliberate. On the back, in the same typewritten font as the letter, was a single line, "You looked just like her." Her fingers trembled. The photo wasn't something pulled from social media. The angle, the timing, meant someone had been there, close enough to watch her without her knowing. The idea pressed down on her chest until her breath came shallow. She didn't remember seeing anyone that day, but now she wondered how many eyes had been on her, and whether one pair still was. She turned it over in her hands, the weight of the paper suddenly heavier than it should have been. She didn't call McKee right away. She just stood there in her kitchen, staring out the window at the quiet street, feeling the sharp edge of fear press in again. Somewhere, far from the courtroom and the headlines, someone else was still scanning crowds, still waiting for the right moment. And maybe, Rebecca thought, the story wasn't over after all.